My son put his hand on my chest at the Christmas dinner table and pushed me to the floor. "This seat," he said, his voice as cold as the winter night, "belongs to my father-in-law. Get out." I fell in front of my entire family, and no one moved to help me up. But what my son didn't know was that the hand he had just pushed away was the same hand that held the master key to the kingdom I had given him. He had no idea that when he woke up the next morning, his entire world would be a smoking ruin and his phone would be lit up with 38 missed calls. Before I tell you how I turned off the lights on my own son's empire, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And be sure to like and subscribe if you believe that respect is not a gift but something that is earned. My name is Caleb Hayes. I'm 75 years old. For 45 of those years, I was an electrical engineer. I didn't just work with wires and circuits. I built systems. I founded Hayes Electrical from the back of my pickup truck with a $2,000 loan and a belief in the simple, powerful logic of a closed circuit. 45 years later, it was one of the largest electrical contracting firms in the state of Michigan. I built it. My wife Lena and I built it. And last year I handed the keys to the kingdom over to my only son Marcus. I thought I was passing on a legacy. I've since learned I was only handing him a weapon to use against me. The story begins on Christmas Eve in a house I did not recognize. It was my son's house, a massive modern mansion in one of those wealthy Detroit suburbs where the old auto baron money had been replaced by a new flashier kind of wealth. I had paid the down payment on it as a wedding gift. As I walked up the heated stone pathway, the air was filled with the sounds of a perfect curated Christmas, the soft melody of a jazz piano trio playing Silent Night, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of polite, sophisticated laughter. It was a beautiful performance. But as an engineer, I know that a system's true nature is revealed not in its performance, but in its wiring. And the wiring in this house was all wrong. I stepped inside and the warmth was immediate, but it was the sterile, impersonal warmth of a luxury hotel lobby, not a home. The Christmas tree was a towering, professionally decorated monstrosity, its ornaments all a uniform, fashionable shade of silver and white. There were no handmade decorations from a kindergarten class, no clumsy, sentimental angels. It was a tree designed to be photographed, not to be loved. Chloe. My daughter-in-law, a woman who seemed to be assembled from the pages of a high-fashion magazine, glided over to me. "Caleb," she said, her smile as bright and as cold as the ornaments on the tree. "You made it. Merry Christmas." She kissed the air next to my cheek. "Merry Christmas, Jessica," I said, still calling her by her full name, a small, quiet act of resistance she had never liked. I looked around the crowded living room at the sea of unfamiliar, wealthy faces. And then I looked towards the dining room. The long, magnificent table was set for 20, and at the head of the table, the seat that had been mine by tradition for 30 years, the seat of the patriarch of the Hayes family, sat another man, Robert Thompson, Jessica's father, a man who had inherited his fortune and had always looked down on me as a man who had to work for his. He was holding court, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, laughing loudly at his own joke. My seat. Jessica followed my gaze. She didn't flinch. "Oh," she said, her voice a smooth, dismissive purr. "Robert is telling one of his stories. We thought as our guest of honor he should have the best seat in the house." Her words were polite, but the message was a blade. I was no longer the head of this family. I was a guest in its new, upgraded version. The coup had been quiet, elegant, and bloodless, and it was already over. Jessica glided away, her duty done, leaving me standing in the entryway. I was a stranger in my own son's home, a ghost at a feast I had paid for. I moved through the living room, a slow, quiet progress through a sea of unfamiliar, wealthy faces. Men in expensive sweaters and women dripping with quiet old money jewelry nodded at me with polite, disinterested smiles. I was an anomaly here, a relic from a different, less polished world. I finally made my way to the dining room, and my heart, which had been a slow, steady beat, gave a single painful thud. The long, magnificent table was a work of art set for 20 with gleaming silver and crystal that I recognized as my own wedding china, a gift from my wife Lena's parents. And at the head of the table, the seat that had been mine by tradition for 30 years, the seat from which I had toasted my son's birth, his graduations, his engagement. That seat was occupied. Robert Thompson. Jessica's father sat there as if it were his birthright, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, holding court, laughing loudly at his own joke. He was a man who had inherited his fortune, and he wore it with the easy, unearned arrogance of a king. I must have stood there for a long time just staring, because Jessica reappeared at my elbow, her touch a light, cool pressure on my arm. "Oh, Caleb," she said, her voice a smooth, dismissive purr. "There you are. We were wondering where you'd gotten to." "Mom, that's my seat, Jessica," I said, my voice quiet but with a core of steel I had not used in a long time. She didn't flinch. Her smile didn't even flicker. "Oh, don't be so old-fashioned," she said, her tone light and patronizing as if speaking to a slightly confused child. "Robert is our guest of honor. We thought he should have the best seat in the house. Your seat is down there," she said, gesturing with a vague, dismissive wave of her hand towards the far end of the long table. "At the end, we've set up a nice little spot for you." I followed her gaze. At the very foot of the table, almost in another room entirely, was a small single chair. It was not a part of the main table arrangement. It was an afterthought, an exile's seat. It was placed next to the small separate table where the younger children, the grandchildren of my cousins, were sitting. I was not just being displaced, I was being demoted, I was being sent to the children's table. The humiliation was so profound, so complete, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. Dinner was a surreal, out-of-body experience. I sat on my small, lonely chair, the sounds of laughter and cheerful conversation from the main table washing over me like the distant roar of the ocean. I ate the expensive, perfectly cooked food without tasting it. I watched my son, my Marcus, at the center of the table. He was playing the part of the new patriarch, laughing at Robert's jokes, refilling his wine glass, a perfect, dutiful son-in-law. Not once in the entire 2 hours of the meal did he look down the length of the table to meet my eyes. Not once. It was a deliberate and total erasure. Finally, the main course was cleared. The dessert, a magnificent flaming Christmas pudding, was brought out. And I knew the time was coming. The toasts, the speeches. For 30 years since my own father had passed, I had been the one to give the Christmas toast. It was a tradition. A simple speech about family, about gratitude, about the memory of those who were no longer with us. It was a thread that connected our past to our present. And tonight, I would not be silenced. I would not allow them to erase this last, most important piece of my legacy. As the coffee was being poured, I saw Robert Thompson clear his throat, a self-important preparatory sound. He was getting ready to speak from my chair, and I knew it was now or never. I pushed my small chair back and stood up. The movement was a small, quiet act of defiance, but it was enough. A few of my cousins at the far end of the table noticed and fell silent. I held up my hand, a gesture I had made 100 times at this very table. "If I may," I said, my voice not loud but clear and steady, carrying across the room, "as is our family's tradition." I never got to finish the sentence. Marcus, my son, was on his feet in an instant. He moved with a speed and a purpose that was shocking. He was at my side before I could say another word. "Dad, sit down," he hissed, his voice a low, angry whisper that only I could hear. His smile for the rest of the table never wavered. "Marcus," I said, my own voice a quiet warning, "this is our tradition." "The traditions have changed," he said, his voice now as cold as the winter night. And then he did it. He placed his hand, the hand of my own son, flat on my chest. "This year," he said, his voice rising slightly so the rest of the table could hear his next words, "Robert will be giving the toast. Now sit down." The hand on my chest was not a gentle guide. It was a firm, assertive pressure. It was a command. And I, a 75-year-old man who had built an empire from nothing, a man who had never backed down from a fight in his life, did not move. I stood my ground. I looked him in the eye. A flicker of something, a flash of pure, frustrated rage crossed his face. And he pushed. It was not a shove. It was a hard, deliberate, and final act of physical dominance. A son pushing his own father. The force was more than I expected. My old legs, not as steady as they once were, betrayed me. I stumbled backward, my arms flailing for a balance that was not there. The small chair I had been sitting on was not behind me, and I fell. I fell to the floor, my hip hitting the polished hardwood with a sickening thud that seemed to echo in the sudden absolute silence of the room. The pain was a sharp, white-hot flash, but it was nothing compared to the shock. The silence. The entire room, the 20 members of my family, the jazz trio in the corner, the serving staff by the kitchen door was frozen in a tableau of pure, unadulterated horror. They just stared. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint, cheerful crackle of the fire in the fireplace. I lay there on the floor of my son's house, a crumpled old man, and I looked up. I looked at the faces of my family, their expressions a mixture of shock, pity, and a terrible, cowardly inaction. I looked at Jessica, my daughter-in-law, who was staring at me with a look of cold, undisguised triumph, and then I looked at my son. He was still standing over me, his hand, the hand that had just pushed me, still held slightly in front of him. He was looking down at me, his father lying on the floor at his feet, and the expression on his face was not one of shock or of remorse or even of anger. It was an expression of pure cold and final indifference. He had won. The coup was complete, and I was the spoils of war. No one moved to help me. Not my brother, not my cousins, and not my son. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. The pain in my hip was a distant, unimportant signal. A new feeling, a feeling as cold and as hard and as clean as a diamond, was forming in my chest. The father, the patriarch, the sentimental old man had died on that floor. And the man who was now slowly, painfully, and by himself beginning to push himself up was someone else entirely. He was an engineer, he was a builder of systems, and he had just discovered a catastrophic failure in his own most important creation. And he knew with a certainty that was as absolute as the law of physics that the only thing to do now was to shut the whole damn system down. I do not remember the drive home. It is a black, empty space in the archive of my memory. I am sure I stopped at the red lights, that I used my turn signals, that I obeyed the simple mechanical rules of the road. But my mind, my soul was not there. It was still on the polished hardwood floor of my son's dining room, looking up at a sea of familiar frozen faces, none of whom reached down to help. I must have gotten home because I found myself standing in my own quiet, dark garage, the engine of my old reliable sedan ticking softly as it cooled. The house was silent. Lena. My wife had been gone for 2 years, but tonight the silence her absence had left was a roaring, deafening void. Christmas Eve, a night for family, and I had never in all my 75 years felt so utterly, completely alone. I walked into the empty house, the house Lena and I had filled with so much love and so many hopes, and I did not turn on the lights. I stood there in the darkness, the faint, cheerful glow of my neighbor's Christmas decorations filtering in through the windows, painting strange, festive patterns on the floor. The pain in my hip from the fall was a dull, persistent throb, a physical echo of the deeper, more profound wound in my heart. My son, my own son, had put his hand on my chest and pushed me. I sank into my old armchair, the one that still held the faint, familiar scent of Lena's perfume, and I looked at the empty seat beside me. "Lena," I whispered into the darkness, "what would you have said? You always saw people so clearly. You would have seen this coming." My mind drifted back, a historian retreating into the archives of a better, happier past. I remembered the early days of Hayes Electrical, not the grand corporation it had become, but the two of us in this very garage late at night, surrounded by spools of wire and half-finished circuit diagrams. I would be working on a prototype, my hands stained with grease and solder, and she would be at a small card table meticulously managing the books, her sharp, intelligent mind making sense of the numbers that always swam before my eyes. "This isn't just for us, Caleb," she had said to me one of those nights, her voice full of a fierce, beautiful hope as she looked around our cluttered garage. "This is for him. This is for Marcus, so he'll never have to struggle like we did. We're building a foundation, a legacy for him to stand on." A legacy. That was the word she had always used. For her, the company was not just a business. It was a testament to our partnership, a promise to our son. Every building we wired, every project we completed, from the smallest residential home to the massive gleaming towers of downtown Detroit, was a brick in the foundation of that legacy. I had taught Marcus everything I knew. I had taken him to job sites when he was just a boy, letting him hold the tools, explaining the simple, elegant logic of a closed circuit. I had watched with a father's bursting pride as he excelled in engineering school, as he joined the company, as he learned the business, not from the top down, but from the ground up. And last year at my retirement party, I had handed it all to him. I had stood on a stage in front of all our employees, and I had given him not just the title of president and CEO, but the legacy Lena and I had spent our lives building. I had given him the keys to the kingdom. And tonight, he had used that kingdom's power not to build, but to cast me out. He had pushed me to the floor to make room for a man who had inherited everything and built nothing. He had traded his own father, his own history, for the cheap, glittering prize of his father-in-law's approval. The pain of my son's betrayal was a physical, burning thing. It was a fire consuming the happy memories, turning them to ash. But as I sat there in the darkness, another feeling began to rise through the pain. It was a feeling I knew well. It was the feeling I got when I was on a job site looking at a complex schematic and I found a single critical flaw in the design. It was the cold, clear, and quiet hum of a system that had been pushed past its breaking point. It was the feeling of an engineer who has just identified a catastrophic failure. The father in me was wounded, heartbroken, lost in the grief of what he had lost. But the engineer was awake. And he knew with the absolute unshakable certainty of a law of physics that a flawed system left uncorrected will inevitably and catastrophically collapse. My son had introduced a fatal error into the system I had built, and it was my duty, my final duty as its creator, to fix it. The house was quiet, the night was deep, and in the cold, dark silence of my empty home, a new schematic, a new and terrible plan began to take shape. I stood in the darkness of my own living room, the faint, cheerful glow of my neighbor's Christmas lights painting strange, festive patterns on the floor. The pain in my hip from the fall was a dull, persistent throb, a physical echo of the deeper, more profound wound in my heart. My son. My own son had put his hand on my chest and pushed me to the ground, not in anger, but with a cold, dismissive indifference, as if I were a piece of furniture that was in his way. I had been cast out not just from my seat at the table, but from my own family, from my own life. The father in me, the man who had held that boy in his arms, who had taught him how to solder a circuit board, who had beamed with a pride so fierce it was a physical ache on the day he graduated from engineering school, that man was drowning in a sea of grief. He wanted to call Marcus, to scream, to weep, to demand an explanation. He wanted to understand how the loving, bright-eyed boy he had raised had become this cold, cruel stranger. He was searching for a reason, for a place where he had gone wrong. Did I spoil him? The father's voice screamed in the silence of my mind. Did I give him too much too easily? Did I, in building a kingdom for him, forget to teach him how to be a good man? For an hour, maybe more, I let that man grieve. I let him wander through the dark, silent rooms of the house, touching the ghosts of a happier past. I looked at the photograph on the mantelpiece, the last one of us all together with Lena, my beautiful, brilliant wife, taken just before she got sick. We were all smiling, a happy family, a lie. But as the waves of pain crashed over me, something else stirred in the depths. A part of my mind, a part that had been honed by 45 years of discipline, of looking at the world not as a chaotic mess of human emotion, but as a series of interconnected logical systems, began to assert itself. The engineer in me, the man who had built Hayes Electrical from a dream in a garage into a corporate giant, began to come online. The engineer was not interested in grief. He was interested in diagnostics. He looked at the evening's events not as a personal tragedy, but as a catastrophic system failure. I had designed a system, a family, a business. Its purpose was to generate not just profit, but prosperity, love, and a legacy of integrity. That system was now clearly broken. I began to analyze the problem with a cold, professional detachment. The system I had designed, the one where love and respect were supposed to be the primary conductors of power, had been bypassed. A foreign parasitic component, Jessica's ambition, Robert's arrogance, had been introduced. This foreign component had infected the system's primary operator, my son, and was causing a critical power surge of greed and entitlement that threatened to burn the whole thing to the ground. My son's action, the physical push, was not just an act of disrespect. In engineering terms, it was a diagnostic signal. It was a red light on a control panel, a screaming alarm that signaled a core meltdown was imminent. He was no longer a reliable operator. He had been compromised. He had, in his arrogance, tried to rewrite the system's core programming to replace its foundational principles of integrity and hard work with a new corrupting code of status and unearned power. And what does an engineer do when faced with a critical runaway system failure? You do not get emotional. You do not try to reason with a short circuit. You do not try to negotiate with a meltdown. You act. You follow the emergency protocols. You isolate the faulty component, you cut the power, and you shut the whole damn system down before it can cause any more damage. The pain was still there, a low burning fire in my chest. But it was no longer a paralyzing force. It was being transformed, transmuted into something else. It was becoming fuel. The cold, clear, and quiet hum of a system that had been pushed past its breaking point. The hum of an engineer who has just identified a critical failure. And who knows, with the absolute, unshakable certainty of a law of physics, that it is his duty to fix it. I walked into my study, the place where I had designed the first schematics for Hayes Electrical, the command center of my life's work. I turned on the single green-shaded lamp on my desk. The room was bathed in a quiet, focused light. I looked at the framed copy of my first patent hanging on the wall, and I remembered. I remembered the fail-safe. When I had handed the company over to Marcus, I had given him the keys to the kingdom. But I had, on Charlie's wise and cautious advice, kept one key for myself. A key he did not know existed. The founder's key. A master administrative password hard-coded into the very bedrock of the company's digital infrastructure, a key that could override any other user, any other protocol. It was a fail-safe, a final ultimate control measure designed for a disaster scenario I had never ever believed would happen. My decision was made. The path forward was no longer shrouded in the fog of a father's grief. It was a clear, sharp, and logical schematic. An emotional confrontation was pointless. You cannot reason with a corrupted code. You can only cut the power. I would not fix my son's character with words, but I could and I must reassert control over the system to prevent a total meltdown. My hand, which had been trembling just an hour before, was now perfectly steady as I reached for the phone. I dialed Charlie's private number. He answered on the first ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Caleb, it's after midnight. Is everything okay?" "Charlie," I said, and my voice was not the voice of his grieving friend. It was the voice of an engineer in the middle of a 5-alarm crisis, a voice stripped of all emotion, a voice of pure cold and absolute command. "It's happened. There's been a hostile takeover attempt at the company, and a critical system failure within the family." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the sound of a man waking up very, very quickly. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm initiating a full system shutdown," I said, my eyes fixed on the glow of my computer screen. "Emergency protocol. I need you to be ready for the legal fallout in the morning. It's going to be significant." "I'm on my way," he said, and hung up. I turned to my computer. The father was gone. The engineer was now in control, and it was time to go to work. I drove home through a city that was a ghost town. The streets of Detroit, usually so full of life, were quiet and empty, bathed in the soft, multicolored glow of a million Christmas lights. Every house I passed was a warm, bright picture of family, of togetherness, of a peace that I no longer had. The lights were not cheerful. They were a mockery, a series of bright, shining insults to the cold, dark silence in my car and in my heart. When I got home, I stood in the darkness of my own living room for a long time. The house Lena and I had filled with so much love and so many hopes, felt like a tomb. The pain in my hip from the fall was a dull, persistent throb, a physical reminder of the deeper, more profound wound that had been inflicted. My son, my own son, had put his hand on my chest and pushed me to the ground, not with the hot rage of an argument, but with the cold, dismissive indifference of a man clearing an obstacle from his path. The father in me, the man who had held that boy in his arms, the man who had taught him how to solder a circuit board, that man was drowning in a sea of grief and shame. He wanted to call Marcus, to scream, to weep, to demand an explanation. He was searching for a reason, for a place where he had gone wrong. "Did I spoil him?" the father's voice screamed in the silence of my mind. "Did I give him too much, too easily? Did I, in building a kingdom for him, forget to teach him how to be a good man?" For an hour, maybe more, I let that man grieve. But as the waves of pain crashed over me, something else stirred in the depths. A part of my mind that had been honed by 45 years of discipline, of looking at the world not as a chaotic mess of human emotion, but as a series of interconnected logical systems, began to assert itself. The engineer in me, the man who had built Hayes Electrical from a dream in a garage into a corporate giant, began to come online. The engineer was not interested in grief. He was interested in diagnostics. He looked at the evening's events not as a personal tragedy, but as a catastrophic system failure. I had designed a system, a family, a business. Its purpose was to generate not just profit, but prosperity, love, and a legacy of integrity. That system was now clearly broken. I began to analyze the problem with a cold, professional detachment. The system I had designed, where love and respect were supposed to be the primary conductors of power, had been bypassed. A foreign parasitic component, Jessica's ambition, Robert's arrogance, had been introduced. This foreign component had infected the system's primary operator, my son, and was causing a critical power surge of greed and entitlement that threatened to burn the whole thing to the ground. My son's action, the physical push, was not just an act of disrespect. In engineering terms, it was a diagnostic signal. It was a red light on a control panel, a screaming alarm that signaled a core meltdown was imminent. He was no longer a reliable operator. He had been compromised. And what does an engineer do when faced with a critical runaway system failure? You do not get emotional. You do not try to reason with a short circuit. You do not try to negotiate with a meltdown. You act. You follow the emergency protocols. You isolate the faulty component, you cut the power, and you shut the whole damn system down before it can cause any more damage. The pain was still there, a low-burning fire in my chest, but it was no longer a paralyzing force. It was being transformed, transmuted into something else. It was becoming fuel. I walked into my study, the place where I had designed the first schematics for Hayes Electrical, the command center of my life's work. I turned on the single green-shaded lamp on my desk. The room was bathed in a quiet, focused light. The father was gone. The engineer was now in control. My hand, which had been trembling just an hour before, was now perfectly steady as I reached for the phone. I dialed Charlie's private number. He answered on the first ring, his voice thick with sleep and the warm, happy sounds of a family Christmas in the background. "Caleb, it's Christmas night. Is everything all right?" "Charlie," I said, and my voice was not the voice of his grieving friend. It was the voice of an engineer in the middle of a 5-alarm crisis. A voice stripped of all emotion, a voice of pure, cold, and absolute command. "I'm sorry to call so late, but it's happened." The happy sounds in the background stopped. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice now sharp and focused. "The coup." I said the word precise and deliberate. "It took place tonight at the dinner table. It was definitive." There was a pause, a silence filled with the weight of 60 years of friendship. "My God, Caleb," he said softly. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "But the company is not. The system has been compromised. I'm initiating the emergency protocol, the founder's key. I'm shutting it all down, tonight. I need you to be ready for the legal fallout in the morning. It's going to be a storm." "I'll be ready," he said without another question. "What do you need me to do?" "Just be ready," I said. "The war has begun." I hung up the phone. I turned to my computer. It was time to go to work. I did not have to wait long. The sound of Charlie's car in my driveway was a quiet reassurance in the deep, echoing silence of the Christmas night. He came in without knocking, his face a grim mask of concern. He was carrying his old leather briefcase, the one he had carried for 40 years, the one that I knew held the legal architecture of my entire life. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't ask me if I was okay. He saw the cold, hard look on my face, and he knew this was not a time for sentiment. This was a time for war. "Okay, Caleb," he said, his voice a low, serious rumble as he closed the study door behind him. "Report. What happened?" I recounted the events of the evening. I did not speak with the emotional, wounded voice of a father. I delivered the facts with the cold, dispassionate precision of an engineer reporting on a catastrophic system failure. I described the stolen seat at the head of the table. I described my attempt to uphold tradition. And I described the final critical event, the physical altercation, the push, the fall, and the profound, absolute silence of a family that had chosen to be silent, witnesses to a coup. As I spoke, I watched Charlie's face. The concern was still there, but it was being overlaid by a slow-burning, righteous anger. He had been there when Lena and I had signed the first loan for the business. He had held Marcus as a baby at his christening. The betrayal I was describing was not an abstract legal problem for him. It was a deep personal insult. "The arrogance," he whispered when I had finished, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The sheer, unmitigated gall. To do that to you. In your own son's house, a house you paid for, on Christmas, in front of the whole family. He stood up and began to pace, not with agitation, but with the focused, caged energy of a prosecutor building his closing argument. They've left us no choice, Caleb. They have declared war. I know, I said quietly, and I have no intention of surrendering. Good, he said, stopping his pacing and turning to face me. Because they have made a critical amateur mistake. They believe that because you gave Marcus the title of CEO, you gave him the power. They have forgotten the fundamental difference between an operator and an architect. He paused, a grim, strategic smile touching his lips. Caleb, do you remember when we drafted the final transfer of ownership documents last year? All those long nights. I insisted on that one final clause, the one you thought was paranoid, the one you said you would never need. I knew exactly what he was talking about. The founder's prerogative, I said. The founder's prerogative. He confirmed, his voice full of a grim satisfaction. A clause that states that you, as the founder of Hayes Electrical, retain the permanent, irrevocable right to initiate a comprehensive systems integrity audit at any time without notice in the event of suspected gross mismanagement or actions deemed detrimental to the company's foundational principles. It's a legal parachute, I said. It's more than that, Charlie corrected. It's a weapon, and you, my friend, are about to use it. Now, if I recall the complex, beautiful, and paranoid system you designed for the company's digital infrastructure, that legal clause is linked to a hard-coded administrative backdoor, isn't it? A master key, a founder's key that no one but you has. I leaned back in my chair, a cold, terrible, and powerful sense of clarity washing over me. It's more than a backdoor, Charlie, I said. It's root access. I can see everything. I can control everything. I cannot be locked out. From my own home, I can shut down the entire system. Charlie's smile widened. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a general who has just been handed the enemy's battle plans. Then that is what you will do, he said. They believe they have staged a successful coup. We are going to show them that they have only succeeded in staging a palace revolt, and the king is still very much in control of the entire kingdom. He pulled a legal pad from his briefcase and sat down opposite me. The friendly, grieving part of our conversation was over. The work had begun. Okay, Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice all business. Let's outline the protocol for this systems integrity audit. For the next hour, we planned the demolition with the same precision I had once used to design the company's first power grid. Step 1. The lockout. I began my engineer's mind, now fully engaged. At 3 a.m., when I know they will be asleep, I will use my root access to revoke all executive-level credentials. Marcus, his new CFO, the one he hired from Robert Thompson's company, his entire sycophantic management team. They will wake up in the morning and their passwords, their key fobs, their very digital identities within the company will simply cease to exist. Clean, Charlie said, scribbling a note. What's next? Step 2. The communications blackout. I continued. I designed the company's server architecture. I can reroute the main servers in less than 5 minutes. All incoming client emails, all calls to the main corporate lines will be diverted to a new secure server that I will set up on my own machine. To the outside world, it will appear as if Hayes Electrical has simply vanished off the face of the earth. Brutal, Charlie murmured with deep appreciation. And the final blow? Step 3, the financial freeze, I said. This is the most critical part. I still have founder-level access to the company's financial software, the system that interfaces with our corporate bank accounts. I will place an immediate system-wide administrative hold on all outgoing payments. No payroll, no supplier invoices, no automatic withdrawals. Nothing can move without a 2-factor authentication code that is linked and can only be linked to my personal cell phone. I am turning off the money tap, Charlie, completely. Charlie leaned back, a look of pure, unadulterated admiration on his face. It's a perfect 3-pronged attack, he said. You're taking away their access, their communication, and their money. You're not just shutting them down, you're making the company a black hole. By 9 a.m. tomorrow, all hell will break loose. And what is your role? I asked. My role is the legal shield, he said, his voice firm. When they inevitably wake up and after a few hours of pure panic realize you are behind this, they will come for you. They will have their lawyers send angry letters. They will try to file an emergency injunction to get access back, and I will be waiting. I will respond to their every move by citing the founder's prerogative clause. I will state that you, as the founder, have discovered evidence of gross mismanagement and have initiated a full audit, as is your legal right. I will bury them in so much paperwork, so many motions to produce so many depositions that they will not see the inside of that company again for years, if ever. The plan was complete. It was a beautiful plan in its terrible logical simplicity. I would not be attacking them. I would simply be turning off the power. They had taken the keys to the kingdom, but they had forgotten that I was the man who had built the power plant. The father who had been pushed to the floor was gone. In his place was the engineer. And the engineer was about to remind his son a fundamental lesson. You never ever disrespect the man who designed the system, because he is the only one who truly knows how to turn it off. Charlie left just after 2 a.m. He left me with a firm handshake, a look of grim resolve, and a final quiet word, "Good luck, Caleb." I didn't need luck. I had a plan, I had a schematic, and I had the key. After he was gone, I stood in the silence of my study for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Outside, the Christmas lights on my neighbor's house blinked red and green, a cheerful, mindless rhythm in the deep, silent dark of the night. Christmas, a time for family, a time for peace. And here I was in the dead of night, preparing to wage a war against my own son. The father in me, the man who had grieved just a few hours before, was gone, silenced by the cold, hard logic of the engineer. The engineer knew that a compromised system could not be tolerated. It had to be isolated and shut down. I sat down at my desk, the old familiar leather of my chair creaking a soft protest in the silence. I turned on my computer. The screen came to life, its cool blue light pushing back the shadows in the room. This machine, this desk, this room, this was where Hayes Electrical had been born. It was here that I had drawn the first circuits, written the first lines of code for our proprietary management software, and sketched out the business plan on the back of a napkin with Lena. It was a place of creation, and tonight I was about to use it as a place of demolition. My plan was not one of hot-headed revenge. It was a cold, surgical, and in its own terrible way, beautiful act of engineering. I was not going to steal their money or destroy their company. I was simply going to turn off the power. I opened a secure encrypted browser and typed in a long, complex web address from memory. It was not the public login page for the company. It was a secret portal, a digital maintenance hatch I had built into the very foundation of the company's online architecture 20 years ago. A back door that only the system's original architect knew existed. The screen that appeared was a simple, stark black and white login prompt. No company logo, no friendly welcome message. Just a single blinking cursor waiting for the master key. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was the final moment of decision, the point of no return. Once I crossed this threshold, the father of Marcus Hayes would be gone forever, replaced by something colder, harder, and far more dangerous. I thought of Lena. I thought of my fall on the hard, polished floor. I thought of my son's indifferent eyes. And my resolve, which had been forged in the fire of that humiliation, became as hard and as unbreakable as a diamond. I typed in the password, a long, complex string of characters I had not used in over a year, but one I had never forgotten. Lena, my North Star 1975, my wife's name, the year we were married, a password created in a time of love now being used as a key to a war. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. My finger hovered over the enter key. The system I had built was a living thing, a complex network of clients, employees, and finances. To shut it down even for a day would cause chaos. It was a monumental, irreversible step, but they had left me no other choice. I pressed the key. The simple login screen vanished, and in its place, the master control panel of Hayes Electrical bloomed into view. A cascade of data, of system statuses, of financial dashboards, of live project tracking. It was the digital heart of the empire I had built, and it was now beating to my command. The system recognized its creator. The father had been cast out. But the architect was now in full control. It was time to begin the audit. The plan was in place. The legal machinery with Charlie at the helm was primed and ready. But the first, most critical, and most personal act of this quiet war had to be executed by me and me alone. It was an act of engineering, a systems correction. It required a cold, steady hand and a complete and total suppression of the grieving father in my heart. After Charlie left, I walked into my study. It was 3 o'clock in the morning on the day after Christmas. The house was a tomb of silence. Outside, the world was a peaceful, festive picture of blinking lights and soft, new-fallen snow. Inside, I was preparing to dismantle an empire. I sat down at my desk, the place where Hayes Electrical had been born from 1,000 late-night schematics and a dream. I turned on my computer and its cool blue light pushed back the shadows. My actions were not those of an angry, vengeful man. They were the slow, deliberate, and methodical actions of a systems engineer preparing to perform a high-risk critical shutdown. I opened a secure encrypted browser and typed in the long, complex web address from memory. It was the back door I had built into the very foundation of my company's online architecture 20 years ago, a digital maintenance hatch that only the system's original architect knew existed. The screen that appeared was a simple, stark, black and white login prompt. No company logo. No friendly welcome message, just a single blinking cursor waiting for the master key. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was the final moment of decision, the point of no return. I typed in the password, a long, complex string of characters I had not used in over a year, but one I had never forgotten: Lena My North Star 1975. My wife's name. The year we were married. A password created in a time of love now being used as a key to a war. I pressed enter. The login screen vanished, and in its place the master control panel of Hayes Electrical bloomed into view, the digital heart of the empire I had built. It was all there. A cascade of data, of system statuses, of financial dashboards, of live project tracking. I was in. The system recognized its creator. Phase 1, the lockout. I navigated to the user administration panel. A list of every employee at Hayes Electrical appeared, from the janitors to the executives. I scrolled down until I found the name I was looking for: Hayes Marcus, President and CEO. The title, the one I had so proudly bestowed upon him, now looked like a cruel joke. I thought of his hand on my chest, of his cold, indifferent eyes as I lay on the floor. He was not a CEO. He was a faulty component, a corrupted file that was threatening the integrity of the entire system. And it was my duty to isolate him. I selected his profile. A menu of options appeared. I clicked the one marked Revoke All Permissions. A confirmation box, a final digital safeguard I had designed myself, popped up on the screen. Are you sure you want to permanently revoke all administrative and user access for this individual? This action is irreversible without founder-level authorization. I clicked Confirm. A small green checkmark appeared next to his name, and then his entire profile grayed out, becoming inert, powerless. I was not just deleting a user, I was performing a digital amputation. I then repeated the process. Jessica Thompson, my daughter-in-law, whose official title was brand consultant, a position she had invented for herself that came with a 6-figure salary and no discernible responsibilities. Revoke. Confirm. Then the new CFO Marcus had hired from his father-in-law's company. Revoke. Confirm. One by one, I moved down the list of the new executive team, the sycophants and yes-men Marcus had surrounded himself with. I was not a father disowning his son. I was an engineer, quietly, cleanly, and efficiently purging a virus from the network. Phase 2. The communications blackout. A company is a living organism. Its emails and phone calls are its central nervous system, the pathways that connect it to the outside world, to its clients, to its suppliers. I was about to perform a procedure that would leave the body intact but render the brain completely and suddenly deaf, dumb, and blind. I navigated to the network architecture and server management panel. Before me was a digital map of my company's information flow, a complex, beautiful system I had designed from scratch. Buried deep in the code was a contingency script I had written years ago, a protocol for a disaster scenario like a catastrophic server failure or a hostile cyber attack. The script was called Ghost Protocol. When activated, it would seamlessly and instantly reroute the company's main DNS records. I located the script and highlighted it. I took a deep breath. This was a major step. It would cause chaos not just for Marcus but for our clients. But it was a necessary step. The chaos was the message. I clicked Execute. Another confirmation box appeared. Execute Ghost Protocol. This will take all primary communication servers offline and reroute incoming data to the secure backup server. This action will result in a total communications blackout for all standard users. I clicked Confirm. On the screen, I watched as lines of code scrolled rapidly. Digital pathways were being severed and new ones were being created. The main email exchange server, the heart of the company's daily life, was taken offline. A new secret server, a server whose existence was known only to me, was activated as the sole recipient of all incoming data. To the outside world, to our biggest clients, to our most important suppliers, it would simply appear that Hayes Electrical's servers were down. But for Marcus, when he woke up, it would be a total information blackout. He would be the captain of a ship standing on the bridge, and all of his instruments would be dead. Phase 3. The financial freeze. This was the final and most critical step. Money is the lifeblood of a company. I was not going to drain the blood. I was simply going to stop the heart. I navigated to the proprietary financial software, the system that linked our accounting to our corporate bank accounts. The main dashboard appeared a live, real-time overview of the company's financial health. Millions of dollars in operating capital, a long list of accounts receivable, and most importantly, a long list of accounts payable scheduled for the next business day. Payroll for our 300 employees, a massive payment to our primary copper wire supplier, a dozen other crucial transactions. I looked at the payroll file. This was the one part of the plan that gave me pause. This would affect innocent people, good people, the men and women who were the true heart of Hayes Electrical. But I knew this was a temporary measure. The freeze was a message to my son, not a death sentence for the company. I would make it right, but first the lesson had to be delivered. I navigated to the Master Administrative Controls, a section of the software that was protected by a separate, even more complex password. I entered it. The screen that appeared had a single ominous-looking button. It was a failsafe I had designed at Charlie's insistence, a final ultimate kill switch. It was labeled Activate Founder's Failsafe. I moved the cursor over the button. A warning box, the final guardian at the gate, appeared. Activating this protocol will place an indefinite administrative hold on all outgoing financial transactions from all company accounts. All scheduled payments will be suspended. No new transactions can be initiated. This action is irreversible without a two-factor authentication code sent to the founder's registered device. Proceed. I looked at the warning. I thought of Lena. I thought of my fall on the hard, polished floor of a house I had paid for. I thought of my son's cold, indifferent eyes. I thought of the future of the company I had built, a company that was being run by a fool who thought a seat at a table was the same as a lifetime of hard work. I clicked, Proceed. The work was done. The system was now inert. I had, in the space of a single hour in the dead of a silent Christmas night, turned my multi-million-dollar corporation into a ghost ship, a perfect, beautiful, and utterly lifeless machine. I logged out of the founder's portal. The master control panel disappeared, replaced by the simple black and white login screen. I shut down my computer. My study was plunged into darkness, save for the blinking, cheerful, and oblivious Christmas lights outside my window. All that was left was the chaos that would begin when the sun came up and my son, the new king, tried to flick a switch that was no longer connected to anything. I sat in the deep, enveloping silence of my study, the faint blue light of the computer screen now dark. The work was done. The system was now inert, a ghost ship adrift and silent on the vast digital sea. It was 4 o'clock in the morning on the day after Christmas, a day that would, I knew, be the longest and most terrible of my son's life. As I sat there, a quiet, invisible engineer in my secret command center, I knew that on the other side of the sleeping city, my son was sleeping the sound, dreamless sleep of a victorious king. He had faced his rival, the old, fading patriarch, and he had won. He had pushed me to the floor, and in doing so had solidified his own place at the head of the table. I could picture his morning with a perfect and terrible clarity. He would wake up late, well after 10 o'clock, in the massive, sun-drenched master bedroom of the house I had helped him buy. The first thing he would feel would not be guilt or remorse or even a flicker of filial concern. He would feel the pleasant, dull ache of a mild champagne hangover, a physical reminder of the celebration that had continued long after I had made my quiet, shamed exit from his home. He would roll over in his $1,000 sheets and look at his beautiful wife Jessica sleeping beside him. And he would feel a surge of pure, unadulterated pride. He had done it. He had finally and publicly broken free of his father's long shadow. He had chosen his new family, the wealthy, powerful Thompson clan, over the old, sentimental Hayes legacy. He had won the approval of his formidable father-in-law, Robert. He was no longer just the son of Caleb Hayes, the founder. He was his own man, the undisputed CEO, the new king. He would think about the previous night's events not with a son's shame, but with a businessman's satisfaction. His father had been an obstacle, an old-fashioned sentimental relic who didn't understand the new, more aggressive vision he had for the company. And he? Marcus had handled the situation. He had removed the obstacle. It had been unpleasant. Yes, the fall had been a bit more dramatic than he had intended, but it was a necessary business decision. A changing of the guard. He would swing his legs out of bed and slip his feet into silk slippers. He would shrug on an expensive cashmere robe. He would walk to the vast floor-to-ceiling windows and look out over his perfectly manicured, snow-covered lawn. He would see his Porsche and her Range Rover parked in the driveway. He would feel the satisfying, solid weight of his own success. He was the master of his universe. He would go downstairs to the vast, silent, and sterile kitchen, a space that looked like it had been lifted from a design magazine. He would make himself an espresso from a machine that cost more than my first car. And as the rich, dark liquid filled his cup, Jessica would appear wrapped in a matching silk robe, her expression one of sleepy, smug satisfaction. "Good morning, Mr. CEO," she would say, her voice a low, sultry purr. She would come up behind him and wrap her arms around his waist. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a king," he would reply, turning to kiss her. "It was a successful coup, wouldn't you say? Your father was a disgrace," she would say, her voice sharp and cold. "He tried to ruin our Christmas. You did what had to be done." Robert was very impressed. He said you finally showed some backbone. The praise from her father, the man he so desperately wanted to impress, would be the final perfect confirmation of his victory. He had not just won control of the company. He had won the respect of the man whose respect he valued more than my own. He would sip his espresso, a feeling of supreme, unassailable confidence settling over him. He would see his phone sitting on the marble countertop where it had been charging all night. But he would not pick it up. Not yet. This was a new day, a new era. He was the one in charge now. He was not beholden to the frantic early morning demands of his clients or his employees. The world could wait for him. "Let them wait," he would say to Jessica with a confident smirk, gesturing to the silent phone. "I'm having my coffee. The king is in his castle. The world can wait for me today." He would be enjoying the quiet of his victory, a quiet I had so carefully and so completely engineered for him. He would not yet know that it was not the quiet of peace, but the profound, unnatural quiet of a machine that has been silently and totally shut down. He saw himself as a conqueror. A historian knows that the most dangerous moment for any conqueror is the morning after the victory, when arrogance blinds him to the insurgency that is already gathering in the shadows. He thought he was demonstrating his power. In reality, he was just delaying the inevitable discovery of his own absolute and total powerlessness. After another 10 minutes of quiet, self-satisfied celebration, he would finally casually saunter over to the counter and pick up his phone. He would be ready to start his day, to issue his commands, to rule his kingdom. He would expect to see a few emails, perhaps a text message from a friend wishing him a Merry Christmas. He was about to discover that while he had been sleeping the sound, dreamless sleep of the victor, his kingdom had been silently and completely burning to the ground. I sat in the quiet of my new empty apartment, a cup of hot tea warming my hands, and I watched the sun rise over the Chicago skyline. The city was waking up, a giant, complex machine humming back to life. On the other side of the country, in a quiet, sterile mansion in Detroit, another smaller machine, my company, my legacy, was failing to do the same. Its heart had been stopped in the dead of night, and its new self-proclaimed master was about to discover that the throne he had so proudly claimed was nothing more than a powerless, empty chair. I could picture the scene with the cold, satisfying clarity of a perfectly designed schematic. Marcus would have awoken late, basking in the warm, golden light of his victory. He would have felt like the new king, the man in charge, the son who had finally and decisively eclipsed the father. He would have enjoyed his espresso, laughed with his beautiful wife, and with the casual arrogance of a man who believes the world revolves around him, he would have finally graciously decided to check his phone. He would pick it up expecting to see the digital equivalent of his subjects bowing to him. a few laudatory emails from his executive team, a text message from his father-in-law congratulating him on his newfound backbone. Instead, he would find a revolution in progress. The lock screen of his phone would be a bloodbath of notifications. 38 missed calls, 112 text messages, 247 unread emails. The numbers themselves would be a shock, a sudden jarring intrusion of chaos into his perfect, well-ordered morning. At first, he would be more annoyed than alarmed. He would see the names Dave, his operations manager, Sarah, his CFO, and the name of the senior project manager from their biggest client, the Sterling Tower project. "My God," I could hear him saying to Jessica with a condescending chuckle. "It seems they can't survive a single holiday without me. The children can't run the daycare on their own." He would try to access his email first to see what all the fuss was about. He would tap the icon, his thumb swiping with an air of bored impatience. He would enter his password, the one that unlocked the digital kingdom he now commanded, and he would be met with a single brutal and incomprehensible line of red text, "Access denied, user credentials not found." He would stare at it baffled. He would try again, typing the password more slowly, more deliberately this time. "Access denied." He would assume it was a tech glitch, a minor irritating bug in the system. "Damn it, department," he would mutter, his annoyance growing. "Can't keep the servers running for a single holiday." He would then try to log into the company's main project management portal to see the status of the Sterling Tower project. A different login screen, the same password, the same soul-crushing result, "Access denied." He would try the financial software, the accounting dashboard. "Access denied, access denied, access denied." He would feel the first cold tendrils of a new and unfamiliar emotion, not annoyance, but a creeping, gnawing unease. The keys he had been given, the keys to his kingdom, suddenly no longer fit the locks. As he stood there staring at the useless screen of his laptop, his phone would ring. The caller ID would read, "Dave, Operations." He would answer, his voice still attempting to project an aura of command. "Dave," he would snap. "What the hell is going on? The whole system seems to be down." The voice that would come back would not be the calm, professional voice of his subordinate. It would be the frantic, terrified voice of a man on a sinking ship. "Marcus, thank God I've been trying to reach you for hours. It's a catastrophe. The entire system is gone. Our email servers are offline. The client portal is a ghost town, and all the corporate phone lines are dead. It's like we've been wiped off the face of the internet." "Calm down, Dave," Marcus would say, his own heart now beginning to hammer in his chest. "It's a server issue. It has to be. Call the IT department. Get them on it." "I can't," Dave would cry. "Their phones are dead too. Nobody can get in touch with anyone. And Marcus, it gets worse. The Sterling Tower project, their project manager has been calling my personal cell all morning. He's furious. They can't access the project files. They can't get updates. They can't reach anyone. He says if we don't re-establish contact and confirm the wiring schematics by the end of the day, they're invoking the penalty clause in the contract. We're talking about a 7-figure penalty, Marcus." As Marcus tried to process this, the scale of the disaster dawning on him, another call would come in, this one from the corporate bank. "Dave, I have to take this," he would say, his voice a strained whisper. He would switch lines. "Mr. Hayes." The voice of his bank manager, a man who was usually so obsequious, would sound formal and deeply concerned. "I'm calling about some highly unusual activity on your corporate accounts. An administrative hold was placed on all outgoing transactions at approximately 3:05 a.m. this morning. We were unable to process this morning's payroll run or the wire transfer to your primary supplier in Chicago. Everything is frozen." "Frozen." Marcus would repeat the word, a lump of ice in his own throat. "What do you mean frozen? On whose authority?" And then the bank manager would deliver the final killing blow. The single sentence that would make the entire horrifying picture come into a sudden, terrible focus. "The hold was initiated by the system's primary architect, sir," the banker would say. "It was triggered by a protocol we have never seen before, a protocol called the Founder's Failsafe." Founder's Failsafe. In that moment, the word founder would cease to be a quaint historical title, a name on a plaque in the lobby. It would become what it had always been, the source of all power, the name of the man who had built the machine and who, with a few quiet keystrokes in the dead of night, had just brought it to a grinding, silent halt. My son would finally horribly understand. It was me. He would hang up on the banker without another word. The full catastrophic scope of the disaster would now be clear. He was locked out. The company was blind, deaf, and dumb. And the money, the lifeblood of the entire enterprise, was frozen solid. He was a king sitting on a throne in a kingdom that had overnight completely ceased to exist. And then his phone would begin to ring, and it would not stop. A flood of calls, a tidal wave of consequences. His CFO screaming about the payroll. His suppliers demanding to know why their payments had been rejected. His father-in-law, Robert Thompson, his voice a low, furious growl demanding to know why his daughter's husband had suddenly become the most incompetent man in the state of Michigan. And most of all, the client from the Sterling Tower, his voice now a cold, lethal promise of a lawsuit that would bankrupt the company 10 times over. Each call would be a new wave crashing against the fragile shore of his arrogance. The operations manager reporting that the ship was blind, the banker reporting that the engines were dead, the client reporting that the storm had arrived, and he, the captain, was locked out of the bridge, a powerless, pathetic spectator to the shipwreck of his own making. Jessica would come into the room drawn by the sound of the incessantly ringing phone and her husband's ragged, panicked breathing. "What is it, Marcus?" she would ask, her voice still full of a sleepy morning annoyance. "What is all that noise?" And he would look at her, the woman for whom he had committed this act of patricide, the woman for whom he had seized the throne, and he would answer her with the broken, whispered voice of a deposed and utterly defeated king. "It's my father," he would say. "He shut it all down." The coup was over. The counter-coup had been a complete and total success. All that was left was for the deposed king to come and beg for the mercy of the man he had pushed to the floor. The initial storm of 38 missed calls was just the outer band of the hurricane. The true destructive force of the storm, the eye wall, was still to come. I knew the sequence of events with the certainty of an engineer who has just run a stress simulation to its breaking point. The system's internal failures, the lockouts, the communication blackout, the financial freeze, were designed to cause a catastrophic external failure, and I knew exactly where that failure would manifest first. The Sterling Tower project, it was the largest contract in the history of Hayes Electrical, a $50 million deal to wire a new state-of-the-art skyscraper in the heart of downtown Detroit. It was a legacy project, the kind of job that defined a company's reputation for a generation. It was a contract I had personally secured, a deal built on a 20-year relationship of trust with its formidable CEO, a man named Arthur Sterling. And I knew that Arthur Sterling did not tolerate failure. In my mind's eye, I could see the scene in my son's house with a perfect, terrible clarity. The initial confusion and annoyance of the morning would have by now metastasized into a full-blown frantic panic. Marcus would be in his sleek, minimalist home office, a room that had always been a stage for his performance as a CEO, but was now a very real and claustrophobic prison. He would be on the phone with his operations manager, Dave, his voice a frantic, desperate bark. "What do you mean you can't get the schematics? They're on the server," he would be shouting. "Marcus, there is no server." Dave's voice would come back tinny and terrified. "The server is a ghost. The entire network is a black hole. I've been trying to call our IT provider for 3 hours, and their lines are busy. I think they're being flooded with calls from every one of our employees who can't log in." As he was speaking, Jessica would burst into the room, her face pale, her hands trembling. "It's the bank," she would say, her voice a reedy whisper. "They called again. They said the payroll run for all 300 employees was rejected this morning. The union is already calling. They're threatening to walk off every single one of our job sites by noon if their people aren't paid." Marcus would be staring at her, his mind unable to process the sheer scale of the cascading disaster. The company was blind, it was deaf, and now it was broke. And at that exact moment of his maximum despair, his personal cell phone would ring. The caller ID would be a name that would make his blood run cold. Arthur Sterling. He would have no choice but to answer. He would gesture frantically for Jessica to be quiet, and he would try to compose his voice into some pathetic imitation of a man in control. "Arthur," he would say, his voice a strained false baritone. "Good morning. I was just about to call you." The voice that would come back would not be the friendly, collegial voice of a business partner. It would be the low-controlled and absolutely lethal voice of a man who is being cost a fortune with every passing second. "Hayes, bitte," Sterling would begin dispensing with any pleasantries. I have been trying to reach your company for the past 3 hours. My project manager is currently standing on the 45th floor of my new tower with 150 union electricians who are being paid a total of $10,000 an hour to stand around and do absolutely nothing. They are doing nothing because your team has missed the 8 a.m. deadline for the final power grid schematics for floors 45 through 60. Your servers are down, your phones are disconnected, and my multi-billion-dollar project is now officially 24 hours behind schedule because of you. You have 60 seconds to explain yourself before I call my lawyers. I could see my son, my proud, arrogant son, physically wilting under the force of that cold, quiet fury. He would stammer, he would try to lie, to spin a story about a massive, unexpected, and unprecedented server failure. "Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry," he would plead. "We've had a catastrophic technical issue overnight. A cyber attack, we think. My entire IT team is working around the clock to resolve it. Stop." Sterling would cut him off the single word a whip crack. "I am not interested in your technical issues, son. I am interested in my project. I had a contract with your father for 20 years. In 2 decades, Caleb Hayes never missed a single deadline, not one. I gave you the courtesy of continuing that contract after he retired because of my profound respect for him. I assumed his competence, his integrity had been passed down. It appears I was wrong. It appears the only thing you inherited was his name." The words would be a deliberate and brutal blow to Marcus's ego. To be called incompetent was one thing. To be told he was a failure in the shadow of his own father, that was a different kind of damnation. "Here is what is going to happen, Marcus." Sterling would continue, his voice now a quiet, deadly promise. "You have 24 hours, not 25. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning to get your house in order to deliver those schematics to my project manager and to have a full crew on my site ready to work. If you fail to meet that deadline, I am invoking the breach of contract clause section 12 paragraph B. I will terminate the contract. I will sue your company for the full and total cost of the project delays, which as of this moment are running at approximately $200,000 an hour. And I will then pick up my phone and I will call every other major developer in this city, and I will personally see to it that Hayes Electrical never works on another major construction project in the state of Michigan again. Am I clear?" Marcus would be speechless, able to manage only a choked, pathetic, "Yes, sir." 9 a.m. Hayes, Sterling would say, and then he would hang up. The silence that followed the click of the disconnected line would be the silence of the abyss. Marcus would be left holding the dead phone, his face ashen, the full world-ending scope of the disaster now terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a temporary problem. This wasn't just an angry client. This was an extinction-level event for the company his grandfather and I had spent our lives building. Jessica would be staring at him, her face a mask of horror. "What was that?" she would whisper. "What did he say?" Marcus would look at her, the woman for whom he had committed his act of patricide, the woman for whom he had seized the throne, and he would answer her with the broken, whispered voice of a deposed and utterly defeated king. "That was the sound of the end of the world," he would say. "We have 24 hours, or we're finished. Everything. The company, the house, us. It's all over." The panic would no longer be a rising tide. It would be a tsunami that had just crested over their heads. And in that desperate, drowning moment, my son would finally, at long last, understand the true nature of power. He would understand that the title on his business card was a fiction. He would understand that the real power, the power to create and the power to destroy, still rested in the steady, quiet hands of the man he had pushed to the floor on Christmas night. He would look at Jessica, his face a mask of pure, abject terror. "We have to go see him," he would say. "We have to go to my father, now." The ultimatum from Arthur Sterling was not a threat. It was a death sentence, a 24-hour countdown to the complete and utter annihilation of Hayes Electrical. In my quiet, detached hotel room, I knew this was the final crushing weight that would break them. Their internal panic, which had been a chaotic, disorganized storm, would now become a focused, frantic, and ultimately futile race against an impossible clock. I could picture the frantic, panicked hours that followed in their cold, white mansion, with the terrible clarity of an engineer watching a system's inevitable catastrophic failure. The first call I knew would be to the IT department. Marcus, still clinging to the tattered illusion of his own authority, would try to command his way out of the crisis. I could see him in his sleek home office, a room designed to look like the command center of a tech mogul. His voice a frantic, angry bark into the speakerphone. "I don't care what you have to do, Michael," he would be shouting at his head of IT. "I don't care if you have to tear the servers apart with your bare hands. Get the system back online. Now." The voice that would come back would be the calm, steady voice of a man who is a professional but who is also utterly helpless. "Marcus, I've already told you." Michael would say, his tone a mixture of frustration and fear. "I can't. We're locked out. And I don't mean we've forgotten a password. I mean we are locked out at the root level. The core architecture. I've run every diagnostic I have. This isn't a crash, it's not a glitch, it's a deliberate, systematic lockdown. The system logs are a ghost town except for a single terrifying entry at 3:05 a.m. It just says, Systems Integrity Audit Initiated Founders Prerogative Clause 12B. And the user level that initiated it. It's a level we've never seen before. A ghost user with a designation I didn't even know existed. It's just called the Architect. Marcus would stare at the speakerphone, the words Founders Prerogative and the Architect echoing in the silent, expensive room. He would be trying to shout orders at a system that no longer recognized his voice. He was a king screaming commands in an empty throne room, unaware that the castle itself had been designed by a man who had kept a secret key to every single door. "There is no override, Marcus." Michael would finish, his voice full of a grim finality. "My hands are tied. Only the founder can reverse this." While Marcus was failing on the technical front, Jessica would be launching her own assault on the financial front. She would be in the other corner of the office, her voice a syrupy, charming purr into her own phone, speaking to their corporate banker. She would be playing the card that had always worked for her, the card of social status, of quiet, old money authority. "David, darling," she would be saying, "there seems to have been a terrible, silly mistake. Some sort of automated hold has been placed on our accounts. I need you to remove it, immediately. We have a payroll run that needs to go out." The banker's voice would be a wall of polite, impenetrable corporate policy. "Jessica, I understand your frustration, but my hands are tied. The founder's fail-safe protocol is a legally binding instrument in your corporate charter. I've had our legal team review it this morning. It was put in place at the company's inception by Mr. Caleb Hayes. It requires a specific encrypted two-factor authentication code from a device registered solely to him. Without that code, I cannot legally release a single dollar. To do so would be a federal offense, and I can assure you I am not going to prison for your payroll problem." "But this is absurd," she would protest, her charming purr beginning to fray at the edges. "I am Mrs. Hayes. My father is Robert Thompson. And with all due respect, ma'am," the banker would reply, his voice now as cold as the vault he guarded. "If Jesus Christ himself called me and asked me to override a founder's fail-safe, the answer would still be no. My advice to you is to speak to Mr. Caleb Hayes." She would slam the phone down, her face a mask of disbelief. She was trying to use her social status as a key, but she was trying to open a vault door made of federal banking regulations. Her charm was useless against the cold, hard logic of the system my old friend and I had so carefully built. Their final, desperate hope would be their most powerful ally, their new king, Robert Thompson. They would get him on a conference call, their voices a duet of panicked desperation. They would explain the situation, the lockout, the frozen accounts, the ultimatum from Arthur Sterling. They would be expecting him to make a call to pull some strings, to use his immense power and influence to make this problem go away. The silence on the other end of the line when they finished would be long and terrifying, and the voice that would come back would not be the voice of a concerned father-in-law. It would be the voice of a ruthless tycoon, a man who saw Marcus not as a son, but as a failed investment. "Let me get this straight." Robert's voice would boom, a low reptilian growl of pure cold fury. "You let your senile old man, a man you pushed to the floor on Christmas Eve, lock you out of your own company, a company that you were supposed to be running, and now you've managed to antagonize Arthur Sterling, a man I have been trying to get a meeting with for 5 years. Are you an idiot, son, or are you just incompetent?" "Robert, please," Trevor would plead. "We just need you to make a call." "I will not make a call," Robert would snarl. "I will not attach my name, my reputation to this spectacular display of amateur-hour incompetence. This is your mess. You created it. You will fix it. Do not call me again until you have." And he would hang up. The final door had slammed shut. They had turned to their new king for aid, only to find that he had no interest in a losing army. Their new foundation, the one they had betrayed me for, the one built on the shifting sands of wealth and status, was revealed to be nothing but a mirage. They would be left alone in their silent, expensive office. The only sound would be the incessant mocking ringing of their phones. The ticking of Arthur Sterling's 24-hour clock would be a deafening roar in their ears. They had tried the technical solution. They had tried the financial solution. They had tried the political solution. Every door was locked. Every path was a dead end, and they would be left with one single humiliating and absolutely unavoidable truth. There was only one key that could open these doors, and that key was in the hands of the man they had cast out into the cold. I can see my son, his face ashen, his arrogance shattered, looking at his wife in a state of pure, abject defeat. "It's him," he would whisper the words, a final, terrible confession of his own powerlessness. "He's the only one. He's the only one with the key." And the new king, the conqueror, the man who had so proudly taken his seat at the head of the table, was finally forced to understand a simple truth of power. The man who builds the system will always, in the end, control it. And now he had no choice but to come as a beggar to the door of the architect. The ultimatum from Arthur Sterling, as I knew it would, had transformed their problem from a financial crisis into an existential one. Their frantic, panicked hours of trying to fight the system I had built had been a complete and utter failure. Every door they had tried to open had been locked. Every ally they had tried to call had turned their back. They were left with one single humiliating and absolutely unavoidable truth. Their only hope for survival, the only key that could restart their world, was in the hands of the man they had publicly humiliated and physically assaulted on Christmas night. They came the next morning. I was in my study, a cup of hot tea in my hand, a book of Civil War history open on my lap. I was not waiting for them, but I was expecting them. The knock on my door when it came was not the angry, demanding pound of a CEO in a hurry. It was a hesitant, almost timid tapping sound, the sound of a beggar. I did not rush to the door. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. I carefully placed a bookmark in my book to mark my page. I was the one in control now. The clock was no longer theirs. It was mine. I walked to the front door and opened it. The two people standing on my porch were strangers. I recognized their faces, of course, but the arrogant, confident, and powerful beings who had inhabited those faces just 2 days ago were gone, replaced by these two broken, terrified refugees. Marcus, my son, the new king, the man who had stood over me with such cold indifference, was a ruin. His expensive suit was rumpled as if he had slept in it. His normally clean-shaven face was covered in a desperate, patchy stubble. His eyes, the eyes that had been so full of a cold, dismissive power, were now red-rimmed and hollow, filled with a pleading animal terror I had never seen in him before. The conqueror was gone. In his place was a scared little boy who had finally and catastrophically discovered the real-world consequences of his own actions. And Jessica, the beautiful, untouchable Ice Queen. Her perfect icy facade had melted, leaving behind a mess of smudged makeup and tear-streaked cheeks. Her stylish, expensive hair was a tangled wreck. The designer clothes she wore, the armor of her social status, now looked absurd, a costume for a play that had been violently and permanently canceled. The woman who had looked at me with such contempt, who had directed me to a child's seat at the end of her table, now looked at me with the desperate, pleading eyes of a condemned prisoner begging for a pardon from the king. They stood there on my porch, not as conquerors, but as supplicants seeking asylum from a storm of their own making. For a long, silent moment, no one spoke. They just stood there, stripped of all their former power, their desperation, a palpable, shivering thing in the cold morning air. It was Marcus who finally broke the silence. His voice was not the confident baritone of a CEO. It was a hoarse, broken whisper. "Dad," he said, the single word, a complete and total confession of his defeat. He looked as if he was about to say more, but his throat seemed to close, and a dry, ragged sob escaped his lips instead. I did not speak. I did not show anger. I did not show triumph. I simply looked at them, my face a calm, unreadable mask. My silence was a weapon, a mirror in which they could see the full, ugly reflection of their own desperation. I was the historian, quietly, calmly observing the final, pathetic moments of a failed and corrupt regime. "Caleb," Jessica began, her voice a reedy, trembling thing I barely recognized. "Please, we messed up. We messed up so bad. We are so sorry." Her apology was not born of remorse. It was born of terror. They were not sorry for what they had done. They were sorry they had been caught. They were sorry for the consequences. I could see it in their eyes, but I continued to play my part. I remained silent. Dad, please. Marcus whispered, tears now openly streaming down his face. You have to help us. Arthur Sterling. He's going to ruin us. The contract is everything. If we lose it, the company is finished. We're finished. You're the only one. You're the only one who can fix this. We'll do anything. Anything you say. Anything. It was the word I had been waiting for. The word of total, unconditional surrender. I looked at my son's face, and for the first time in years, I did not see the arrogant CEO or the dismissive young man. I saw a child who was in over his head, a boy who had been given a powerful machine and had driven it recklessly off a cliff. There was no love in me, not anymore. But there was perhaps a faint, distant echo of a father's duty. Not the duty to save him, but the duty to teach him. I stepped back from the door, a silent, non-committal gesture. I did not invite them in warmly. I simply created an opening. They stumbled into my house, the house of the man they had cast out, the house that was now their only and final hope. The interrogation was about to begin. They stumbled into my study, the room where I had made the decision to dismantle their world, and they looked like shipwreck survivors who had washed ashore on a hostile island. The arrogance, the confidence, the casual, cruel power they had wielded just 2 days before was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged, and deeply pathetic desperation. I did not ask them to sit. I remained in my old leather armchair, a book open on my lap, and I simply watched them. My silence was a vacuum, and I knew their panic would rush to fill it. It was Marcus who broke first. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands held out in a gesture of supplication. Dad, he began, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. We are so sorry. I am so sorry. What I did at Christmas, it was unforgivable. I was trying to impress Robert. I was stupid. I was weak. I am so sorry. Jessica, seeing her cue, immediately began to weep quiet, desperate sobs that were a far cry from the theatrical wailing she had performed before. Caleb, she whispered, her eyes red and swollen. We made a terrible mistake. A horrible, horrible mistake. But please, you have to help us. You have to turn the company back on. Arthur Sterling. He's going to ruin us. He gave us until tomorrow morning. Please, we'll do anything. Anything you say. I said nothing. I just looked at them, my face a calm, unreadable mask. My silence seemed to unnerve them, to make them more desperate. They had come here with a script of apology and contrition, and I was refusing to read my lines. Their apologies were not for the betrayal, not for the humiliation, not for the monstrous plan to cast me out of my own home. Their apologies were for the failure of their plan. They were not sorry for pushing me. They were sorry that I had the power to push back. I could see it in their eyes. This was not remorse. This was damage control. When their initial wave of apologies met only a wall of my silence, the second stage of their performance began, the excuses, the desperate, frantic attempt to shift the blame. It was Robert, Marcus stammered, his eyes darting around the room looking for any narrative that might save him. He got in my head. He has this way of making you feel small. He said I wasn't a real CEO until I could make the tough decisions. He said you were a relic, an obstacle to the company's future. I didn't believe him, not really, but I wanted his respect. I wanted to prove to him, to Jessica, that I was a real man, a real leader. So now, he was a victim of his father-in-law's toxic masculinity. A fascinating, if predictable, defense. Jessica, hearing her cue, immediately began to weave her own thread in this tapestry of lies. He's right, Caleb, she said, her sobs subsiding as she shifted into the role of the supportive, if misguided, wife. My father can be a bully. He put so much pressure on Marcus. And I just wanted my husband to be happy, to be successful. The lifestyle, the house. I didn't know where the money was coming from. He told me the company was doing better than ever. I was so proud of him. I never questioned it. I was a fool, a naive, trusting fool. I should have seen it. It was a brilliant performance. The weak, manipulated husband and the naive, trusting wife. Two innocent victims caught in the crossfire of older, more powerful men. My father-in-law and me. It was a story designed to absolve them of all agency, of all responsibility. I listened, my face impassive, and the historian in me marveled at their creativity. They were like the leaders of a failed state now standing before a tribunal, each one desperately trying to rewrite history, to recast themselves as patriots who had been led astray by bad advisors. They were offering me each other's heads on a platter, hoping I would accept one and spare the other. When the excuses and the blame shifting also met with the same unnerving silence from me, the final ugliest stage of their performance began. The raw, selfish, and utterly honest pleading. Their stories of victimhood had failed, so now they would appeal to my self-interest, to the one thing they truly understood: money. "Dad, the company." Marcus said, his voice now a desperate, whining plea. "Think about the company. Everything you and Mom built. Everything. It's all going to be gone. The lawsuits from Sterling alone will bankrupt us. The reputation of Hayes Electrical will be destroyed forever. Is that what you want? Is that what Mom would have wanted? To see her name? Our name dragged through the mud." Jessica jumped in her own plea, just as nakedly selfish. "My father will disown me," she wept. "My friends, I'll be a laughingstock. The videos from Christmas, they're already everywhere. My life will be over. We'll have nothing. We'll be on the street." They went on like this for a long time, a rising, falling tide of tears, apologies, excuses, and threats. They circled the room, they knelt, they begged, they threw every ounce of their considerable performative talents into this final desperate gambit. They were trying to find the right combination of words, the right emotional key that would unlock the forgiveness and the bank account of the man they had so profoundly misjudged. I let them exhaust themselves. My silence was a vacuum, and they were desperately, frantically trying to fill it with any words that might save them. Finally, their energy ran out. Their arguments were spent. Their tears were dry. They were left in the middle of my study, two defeated, pathetic figures surrounded by the wreckage of their own lies. They were silent, their ragged breathing the only sound in the room. And then, and only then, did I speak. My voice, when it came, was not the voice of a father. It was not angry. It was not sad. It was the quiet, cold, and dispassionate voice of an engineer delivering a final systems diagnosis. "Are you finished?" I asked. They both looked up, stunned into silence by the coldness of my tone. I did not address their apologies. I did not address their excuses. I ignored their entire hour-long performance as if it had never happened. "The problem you have," I stated, my eyes moving from my son's face to his wife's, "is not a family problem. It is a business problem. It is a catastrophic systems failure, and it will be addressed as such." I stood up from my chair. "You have in the space of a single year taken a profitable, respected, and stable company, a company your mother and I spent 40 years of our lives building, and you have driven it to the brink of total collapse. Arthur Sterling's ultimatum is not the cause of this crisis. It is a symptom of a much larger disease: your incompetence, your arrogance, and your profound and absolute lack of character." I walked over to my desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. It was a formal letter which I had typed that morning. "I will consider a solution," I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "But it will not be on your terms. It will be on mine. This is not a conversation. This is an instruction." I looked at my son. "You will be at the Hayes Electrical main office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. You will be in the main boardroom. You will instruct your entire executive team, the ones you hired, to be there as well. We will have a meeting to discuss the future, if any, of the company." They stared at me, their faces a mixture of a new dawning hope and a new, colder kind of dread. I was not the forgiving father they had come to beg from. I was the founder, the owner, the chairman of the board they had forgotten existed. I was the man in charge. I walked to the door of the study and held it open. "You may see yourselves out," I said. They had come to my house seeking a father's mercy. They left with a CEO's summons. They thought they were in a family drama. They were about to learn they were in a corporate restructuring, and their positions, I knew, were about to be eliminated. I arrived at the Hayes Electrical headquarters at precisely 8:45 a.m. I did not go inside. I sat with Charlie in his car in the parking garage across the street in a spot that gave us a clear view of the executive entrance. The building, a sleek, modern tower of glass and steel that I had commissioned just 5 years before my retirement, gleamed in the cold morning sun. It was a monument to a lifetime of hard work, a symbol of the Hayes legacy. And today, it was a battlefield. I knew what was happening up on the top floor in the main boardroom I had designed. It was a scene I had envisioned with the clarity of an engineer reviewing a schematic. It was a scene of quiet corporate terror. The room itself would be a picture of imposing power. A long, polished mahogany table that could seat 30. expensive ergonomic leather chairs, and a single massive floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic godlike view of the city of Detroit. It was a room designed to intimidate, to project an aura of unshakable success. But this morning that aura would be gone, replaced by the thick, suffocating atmosphere of a royal court that has just learned the king is dead and a new, unknown, and possibly hostile monarch is about to be crowned. They would all be there. Marcus's new executive team, the slick, ambitious men he had hired from his father-in-law's world, would be clustered at one end of the table. They would be whispering their faces a mixture of anger and anxiety. They would be talking about lawsuits, about corporate governance, about the outrageous, senile overreach of the old man. Their loyalty was to Marcus, or rather to the power and the paychecks he had provided, and they could feel that power slipping away. At the other end of the table, the old guard would be sitting in a quiet, watchful silence. Men like Dave, my old operations manager, a man who had started with me in the garage 30 years ago. Men who remembered Lena. Men who understood the company's true foundation was not in its stock price, but in its reputation for integrity. They would be nervous, but underneath their nervousness there would be a faint, flickering spark of hope. They were not loyal to the title of CEO. They were loyal to the company itself. They were sensing the possibility of a restoration. And in the middle of it all, at the head of the table in the grand leather chair that I had once occupied, would be my son. He would be a ghost at his own funeral. I could see him pale and exhausted, his expensive suit looking like a costume that was 2 sizes too big for him. He would be trying to project an aura of calm, of a leader in control of a temporary crisis. But his trembling hands, his darting, terrified eyes would betray him. He was no longer the CEO. He was a defendant sitting in a courtroom of his own making, waiting for the judge to enter and deliver his sentence. And beside him, a statue of brittle, furious defiance would be Jessica. She would be trying to rally the troops to project a strength her husband no longer possessed. "This is absurd," I could hear her saying in a low, fierce whisper to the nervous executives. "He can't just waltz in here and take over. We have lawyers. There are rules. This is a hostile, illegal action." But her bravado would be a thin, fragile mask over her own terror. She more than anyone knew that the world she had so carefully constructed was on the verge of total, catastrophic collapse. The clock on the boardroom wall, a large, elegant piece I had chosen myself, would be ticking each second a hammer blow against the tense silence. 8:58. 8:59. They would be a room full of condemned prisoners waiting for the sound of the executioner's footsteps in the hall. They had come here summoned by a man they had dismissed, a man they thought they had defeated. They did not yet understand that the company was never the prize, it was only ever the battlefield. And the man who had designed that battlefield was about to return. At precisely 9 o'clock, the heavy oak doors to the boardroom would swing silently open, and we would be standing there, me and Charlie. I would not be the broken old man they had last seen, a crumpled figure on a polished floor. I would be wearing my best suit, the one I had worn to the signing of the Sterling Tower contract. I would be standing tall, my face would be calm, my expression unreadable. Beside me, Charlie, his old leather briefcase in his hand, would look like the personification of quiet corporate and legal authority. The waiting was over. The judge had entered the courtroom, and the trial was about to begin. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung silently open, and we were standing there, me and Charlie. The 20 anxious faces around the long, polished mahogany table turned as one, and a new kind of silence. A silence of absolute, heart-stopping dread fell over the room. I was not the man they had last seen, a crumpled, humiliated figure on a polished floor. I was wearing my best suit, the dark, conservative one I had worn to the signing of the Sterling Tower contract, a suit that was an armor of quiet corporate power. I stood tall, my face calm, my expression unreadable. Beside me, Charlie, his old leather briefcase in his hand, looked like the personification of quiet legal authority. We did not speak. I simply walked my steps, slow and deliberate, down the length of the long room towards the head of the table. Towards the grand leather chair, my chair where my son was sitting, a pale and terrified ghost presiding over the ruins of his own brief, disastrous reign. Every eye in the room followed me. I could feel their fear, their hope, their hatred, a palpable, vibrating energy in the air. I stopped when I reached the head of the table. I did not look at my son. I simply looked at the chair he was occupying. He seemed to shrink under my gaze to become smaller, a child caught in his father's office. He made a move as if to stand to cede the seat, but I held up a single hand, a quiet, almost imperceptible gesture that froze him in place. This was not his chair to give. It was mine to take. I turned to face the room. My eyes, the eyes of an engineer, scanned the system before me. I saw Marcus's new executives, their faces a mixture of defiance and a dawning terrible understanding. I saw the old guard men like Dave, my operations manager, their faces grim but with a flicker of something, a faint, dangerous spark of hope. And I saw my son, a broken, pathetic figure at the head of a table he did not command. Charlie took his position by the door, a silent, watchful sentinel. The trial was about to begin, and I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen." I began, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent waiting room. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I am Caleb Hayes, the founder of this company, and I am here today to conduct a systems integrity audit." I let the words hang in the air. Audit. It was a cold, clinical, and terrifying word. "In the past 48 hours, I continued, my voice a calm, dispassionate monotone, this company has experienced a series of catastrophic system failures, a complete communications blackout, a total financial paralysis, and most critically, a near-fatal breach of contract with our single largest client." I turned my gaze for the first time to my son, Marcus. "Would you care to explain to this board how under your leadership this company was brought to the brink of total annihilation in less than 36 hours? Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a fish gasping for air in a boat that was already on the shore. "I didn't think so," I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. "The problem this company has is not a technical problem. The servers did not fail. The software did not crash. The problem," I said, my eyes sweeping across the faces of his new executive team, "is a human problem, a leadership problem, a problem of character." I began to walk slowly along the side of the table, my hands clasped behind my back. "I founded this company on two simple principles: excellence and integrity. We did the job right, and we did it honestly. That was the foundation. That was the entire schematic. And for 40 years, that foundation held. This company weathered recessions and strikes and market crashes, and it survived. It thrived. Because our clients' men, like Arthur Sterling, knew that our word was our bond." I stopped and looked at my son again. And then a new leadership took over. A leadership that believed that the foundation of this company was not integrity, but image. A leadership that believed that a seat at the head of the table was a prize to be won, rather than a responsibility to be earned. A leadership that in its arrogance, its incompetence, and its profound and absolute lack of character managed to do in 1 year what our worst enemies could not do in 40. They broke it. They broke the system. I saw a flicker of defiance in Jessica's eyes. She started to speak. "This is—" "You will be silent," I said, not turning to her, my voice not rising, but taking on an edge of pure cold steel that made her flinch as if struck. "You are a guest at this meeting. You have no position, no authority, and no voice here." The room was as silent as a tomb. I had re-established the chain of command. I returned to the head of the table. I looked at Marcus, and for a long moment the engineer stepped back, and the father, the heartbroken, disappointed father, spoke. "I gave you a kingdom son," I said, my voice now a low, sad whisper. "I gave you the work of my entire life, my legacy, your mother's legacy. And you treated it like a toy. You surrounded yourself with fools and sycophants who told you what you wanted to hear. You valued the approval of men like your father-in-law, a man who has never built a single thing in his entire life, over the principles that this company was built on. And on Christmas night you made your choice. You chose his world over mine. You chose the illusion of power over the reality of responsibility." I let the words sink in. I saw the shame, the true soul-crushing shame, finally dawn in my son's eyes. "And so now," I said, my voice hardening again, the engineer returning, "I am making my choice." I took out my phone, typed in a short code, and pressed send. Across the room, the massive presentation screen on the wall hummed to life. The company's internal network, the email servers, the client portal, it all came back online. A collective gasp of relief went through the room. "The system is now operational," I announced. "The communications blackout is over. The financial freeze has been lifted. The wire transfer to your primary supplier has been processed. And the final schematics for the Sterling Tower project were emailed to Arthur Sterling's project manager 5 minutes ago. I have spoken with Arthur personally. The contract is secure. The crisis is over." A wave of relief so powerful it was a physical thing washed over the room. Marcus slumped in his chair, his body trembling. He thought it was over. He thought he had survived. He thought his father had just come to save the day, to fix the problem, and then to retreat back into his quiet retirement. He was wrong. "However," I said, my voice cutting through their relief like a surgeon's scalpel, "the audit is not over. It is just beginning. As of this moment, I am invoking the Founder's Prerogative Clause 12B, and I am reassuming my position as the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Electrical effective immediately." I looked at his executive team. "Your services," I said, my voice a flat final verdict, "are no longer required. You will be escorted from the building by security. Your severance packages will be minimal." And then I turned finally to my son. I looked down at him, not with anger, not with hatred, but with the cold, dispassionate gaze of a systems engineer about to decommission a faulty piece of hardware. "As for you, Marcus," I said, "you are not fired. That would be too easy. No, you have been reassigned. Your position as president and CEO has been eliminated. Your new title," I said, savoring the words, "is Project Manager Trainee Level 1. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly. You will report directly to Dave, the man you were so eager to replace. Your first assignment will be on the Sterling Tower project. You will be on site in a hard hat at 6 a.m. every morning. You will carry the tools. You will run the wires. You will do the work, the actual work." He stared at me, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. He was not just being demoted, he was being annihilated, his entire identity, his entire world being systematically dismantled in front of his peers. "You wanted a seat at the head of the table, son," I said, my voice dropping to a final quiet and absolutely unforgiving whisper. "And you got it. But you made a critical engineering mistake. You assumed the seat was the source of the power. You have it backwards. The power is the source of the seat." I leaned in closer, my voice for his ears alone. "The seat I sat in on Christmas Eve at the end of the table was a place of honor because I had earned it. The seat you sit in now," I said, tapping the back of his expensive leather throne, "is a place of shame because you tried to steal it." I stood up to my full height, the undisputed master of the room, of the company of his future. "Now," I said, my voice booming with a power he had never heard from me before, "get out of my chair." I did not stay to watch the immediate aftermath. I had delivered my verdict. I had reset the system. My work in that room was done. Charlie and I walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a silence so profound it was like the vacuum of space, a silence in which my son's entire universe had just collapsed. As we walked down the long, quiet hallway, I could feel the shockwaves of my decision emanating from the room behind us. I did not need to be there to know what would happen next. The partnership, the one built on a shared dream of unearned power, was about to face its final, fatal stress test. I could picture them in the cold concrete emptiness of the executive parking garage an hour later. The emergency was over. The company was safe. But their lives were in ruins. The shock would have worn off by then, replaced by the raw, ugly reality of their new situation. And that is when the final internal battle would begin. Jessica, I knew, would be the one still fighting. Her pride, her entire sense of self was tied to the image of the life my son had promised her. She could not, would not accept a life of diminished status. She would be a cornered, furious animal. "You are not going to accept this, are you?" I could hear her saying, her voice a low, venomous hiss. They would be standing by Marcus's Porsche, a car that he was just now realizing he would no longer be able to afford. "A trainee. He's humiliating you, Marcus. He's doing it in front of everyone. In front of the people who used to work for you. He's humiliating me." My son, I imagined, would be a hollowed-out man. The arrogance, the confidence, the entire carefully constructed persona of the powerful CEO had been systematically dismantled and stripped away in that boardroom, leaving behind only the raw, terrified, and deeply ashamed man beneath. "What do you want me to do, Jess?" he would ask, his voice empty, defeated. "We fight him," she would snarl, her eyes blazing with a furious, impotent rage. "We get a lawyer. My father will give us the best lawyers in the city. We sue him for wrongful termination for emotional distress. We tell the world what a cruel, vindictive monster he is. We do not let him win. And for the first time perhaps in his entire life, my son would see her for who she truly was. Not a loving, supportive partner, but an ally whose loyalty was conditional, an ally who was only interested in a winning side. He would look at her, and he would see the same cold, ruthless ambition that had led them to this very disaster. Fight him with what, Jess? He would ask, his voice a dead flat monotone. With what money, with what power did you not see what he just did? He turned off the entire company with a few keystrokes from his study. He controls the servers, he controls the bank accounts, he controls the board, he controls the story. He's not a man, Jess, he's the system, and he just reminded us that we are nothing but a minor correctable error. So that's it? She would scoff, her voice dripping with contempt. You're just going to give up. You're going to put on a hard hat and a pair of work boots and pretend to be a common laborer. For him, after what he did to us, to me. My father was right about you. You're weak. You have no spine. And her contempt I knew would be the final clarifying blow. He had thrown away his relationship with me, his father, for her. For the approval of her and her family. And now at the moment of his greatest defeat, she was offering him not comfort, not support, but more of the same poison that had led him here, a demand for a strength he did not have in a fight he could not win. He was faced with two choices. He could follow her into a noisy, expensive, and ultimately doomed legal battle, a final public act of defiance that would end in his total and complete annihilation, the empty freedom of total ruin. Or he could accept the humiliating, soul-crushing terms his father had offered him, the difficult, shameful, and perhaps redeeming bondage of starting over. It was the first real choice he had ever had to make in his entire life, a choice between a proud death and a humble life. I could see him standing there in the cold, concrete silence of the parking garage, the ruins of his life at his feet. He would look at her beautiful, furious, and utterly unforgiving face. And then he would look at his own two hands, the soft, smooth hands of a man who had never had to build a single thing in his life, and he would make his choice. Yes, he would say, his voice a quiet, broken whisper. I am. It's the only thing I have left. It's the only way to start again. The look on Jessica's face would be one of pure, unadulterated disgust. This was not the man she had married. The powerful, confident CEO was gone, replaced by this broken, pathetic creature who was willing to accept humiliation. I'm done, Marcus, she would say, her voice as cold and as final as a tombstone. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to be the wife of a trainee. She would turn her heels, clicking an angry staccato rhythm on the concrete, and she would walk away, pulling out her phone to call her father, to call a car, to call anyone who could get her away from the stench of this failure. Marcus would be left alone in the parking garage, a man who had lost his company, his wife, his fortune, his status, and his pride, all in the space of a single terrible morning. He had lost everything. But in choosing to stay, in choosing to work, in choosing the hard, humiliating path, perhaps, just perhaps, he had finally found a chance to gain the one thing he had never truly had himself. I was not there to see it. I had delivered my verdict, and as a good judge does, I had left the courtroom to allow the sentence to be absorbed. But I knew my son, and I knew the woman he had married, and I knew with the grim certainty of a historian predicting the aftermath of a failed coup what that final private confrontation in the parking garage must have been like. They would have stumbled out of the elevator into the cold concrete emptiness of the executive parking garage, the silence of the space a stark contrast to the ringing in their ears. The shock of their public annihilation would have been wearing off, replaced by the raw, ugly reality of their new situation. And that is when Jessica's terror would have curdled into its final, most potent form, contempt. You are not going to accept this, are you? I could hear her saying, her voice a low, venomous hiss. They would be standing by Marcus's Porsche, the sleek black symbol of a life that was now officially over. A trainee. A common laborer. He's humiliating you, Marcus. He's doing it in front of everyone who used to work for you. He's humiliating me. My son, I imagined, would be a hollowed-out man. The arrogant, confident mask of the CEO had been systematically dismantled and stripped away in that boardroom, leaving behind only the raw, terrified, and deeply ashamed man beneath. "What do you want me to do, Jess?" he would ask, his voice empty, defeated. He won. It's over. It is not over. She would snarl, her eyes blazing with a furious, impotent rage. "We fight him. We get a lawyer. My father will give us the best lawyers in the city. We sue him for wrongful termination, for emotional distress. We tell the world what a cruel, vindictive monster he is. We do not let him get away with this." And for the first time perhaps in his entire life, my son would see her for who she truly was. Not a loving, supportive partner in life, but a ruthless business partner whose only interest was in a profitable outcome. He would look at her beautiful, furious face, and he would see the same cold, reptilian ambition that he had seen in her father's eyes, the same ambition that had led him to this very disaster. Fight him with what, Jess? He would ask, his voice a dead, flat monotone. With what money? With what power? Did you not see what he just did? He turned off the entire company with a few keystrokes from his study. He controls the servers, he controls the bank accounts, he controls the board, he controls the story. He controls reality. We have nothing. We are nothing. So that's it, she would scoff, her voice dripping with the contempt of a woman who has just discovered her prize racehorse has a broken leg. You're just going to give up. You're just going to put on a hard hat and a pair of work boots and pretend to be a common laborer for him, after what he did to us, to me. My father was right about you. You're weak. You have no spine. Her contempt, I knew, would be the final clarifying blow. He had thrown away his relationship with me, his own father, for her, for the approval of her and her family. And now, at the moment of his greatest defeat, his most profound humiliation, she was offering him not comfort, not support, but more of the same poison that had led him here, a demand for a strength he did not have in a fight he could not possibly win. He was a man who had been given a kingdom and had lost it all before lunch, and he now stood at a crossroads with two paths before him. The path his wife was offering, the path of flight, of blame, of a noisy, expensive, and ultimately doomed legal battle, a path that led to a life of bitterness and ultimate obscurity. Or the path his father had offered, a long, hard, and deeply humiliating road of work, a road that began at the very bottom, but a road that just maybe led back to himself. It was the first real choice he had ever had to make in his entire life, a choice between a proud death and a humble life. I did not know which path he would choose. The man he had become, the man who had pushed me on Christmas night, would have chosen to run. But I had to hope for his mother Lena's sake that a small, forgotten piece of the boy he once was, the boy who had been so proud of his first summer job on a construction site, was still in there somewhere. In my mind, I see him standing there in the cold, concrete silence of the parking garage. He looks at her beautiful, furious, and utterly unforgiving face. He looks at the Porsche, the symbol of the lie he had been living, and then he looks at his own two hands, the soft, smooth, uncalloused hands of a man who had never had to build a single thing in his life. And he makes his choice. Yes, he would say, his voice a quiet, broken whisper that was somehow stronger than all his previous shouting. I am. It's the only thing I have left. It's the only way to start again. The look on Jessica's face would be one of pure, unadulterated disgust. This was not the man she had married. The powerful, confident CEO was gone, replaced by this broken, pathetic creature who was willing to accept humiliation. I'm done, Marcus, she would say, her voice as cold and as final as a tombstone. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to be the wife of a trainee. She would turn her heels, clicking an angry staccato rhythm on the concrete, and she would walk away, pulling out her phone to call her father, to call a car, to call anyone who could get her away from the stench of this failure. Marcus would be left alone in the parking garage, a man who had lost his company, his wife, his fortune, his status, and his pride, all in the space of a single terrible morning. He would have nothing left, except a choice, and in that moment, I imagine he would have taken out his own phone. He would scroll through his contacts past the names of his powerful fair-weather friends until he found the name of the man who was now his boss, Dave, the operations manager, and he would make the call. Dave, he would say, his voice quiet, broken, but clear. It's Marcus, my father. He said the Sterling Tower project is my first assignment. What time do I need to be on site in the morning? He had lost everything. But in choosing to stay in, choosing to work, and choosing the hard path, perhaps, just perhaps, he had finally found a chance to gain the one thing he had never truly had himself. 1 year later, the world had turned. Christmas Eve arrived again, not with the cold, tense dread of an impending war, but with the quiet, peaceful rhythm of a company and a family that was slowly, carefully healing. The annual Hayes Electrical Christmas party was not held in a flashy, impersonal hotel ballroom, the kind Marcus and Jessica would have chosen. Instead, we held it in the grand restored atrium of the Detroit Public Library, a project our company had spent the better part of the last year helping to renovate, a gift back to the city that had given us everything. The air was not filled with the brittle, sophisticated laughter of strangers trying to impress each other. It was filled with the warm, genuine camaraderie of people who had weathered a storm together and had emerged stronger and more united on the other side. I sat at the head of the main table, a seat I had not occupied but had simply reassumed. Beside me was Charlie, a glass of good bourbon in his hand, a look of quiet, satisfied peace on his face. The chair on my other side, the one that had once belonged to my wife Lena, was empty. It would always be empty. But for the first time in a long time, the emptiness did not feel like a void. It felt like a quiet, respectful space, a testament to a memory that was now finally safe. I looked out across the crowded room. I saw our employees, our engineers, our electricians, and their families, all of them laughing, eating, celebrating a year of hard work and renewed success. The company was smaller now, leaner. I had trimmed the fat, the unnecessary executive positions, the bloated marketing budget. We were no longer focused on image. We were focused once again on the work, and the work was good. And then I saw him, my son. Marcus was not at the head table. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He was in a simple, well-tailored suit, the kind a man buys with his own hard-earned money. He was not schmoozing with clients or holding court with executives. He was moving through the room with a quiet, focused energy, a tablet in his hand. He was checking on the catering staff. He was coordinating with the event manager. He was talking to a group of junior engineers, not as their boss, but as their colleague, his head bent as he listened to one of them explain a technical problem. He was working. His divorce from Jessica had been finalized in the spring. It was a quiet, ugly affair, another casualty of the wreckage of their shared ambition. She and her father were gone phantoms from a different life. Marcus was alone now. He had moved out of the mansion and into a small, modest apartment downtown. He drove a sensible, American-made car. And every morning at 6 a.m. he was on a job site, a hard hat on his head, a set of blueprints in his hand. The demotion had been a brutal public humiliation. The first few months I knew had been hell for him. He had to endure the whispers, the pitying looks from his former subordinates, the quiet, ever-present judgment of the man who was both his father and his new, formidable CEO. Many times I know he was tempted to quit. But he had not. He had stayed. He had endured. And he had slowly, quietly, and with a humility I had never seen in him before, begun to do the work. He was no longer the charming, glib salesman who had inherited a title. He was becoming an engineer again. He was learning the business from the ground up the way I had always intended for him to. And in doing so, he was beginning for the first time to earn the respect of the men and women who worked for him, not because of his name, but because of his competence. Later in the evening, he made his way to my table. He stood beside me, not with the easy proprietary air of an heir, but with the quiet, respectful posture of a junior employee reporting to his boss. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice quiet and professional. We had unspokenly agreed that at work I was Mr. Hayes. Dad was a title he would have to earn back in his own time. I just wanted to let you know the final inspection for the Sterling Tower's upper-level grid passed this afternoon. We are officially ahead of schedule. Arthur Sterling sends his personal regards. "That's good work, Marcus," I said, my own voice just as professional. "Very good work. Thank you for the update." "Of course, sir," he said. He hesitated for a moment as if wanting to say more. But he just gave a small, respectful nod, and then he turned and walked away back to his work, back to the life he was so painstakingly rebuilding. One circuit, one project, one day at a time. I watched him go, and I felt a complex and unfamiliar mixture of emotions. There was still a deep, abiding sadness for the son I had lost, for the years we had wasted, for the terrible necessary pain I had been forced to inflict. But underneath the sadness, there was a new, growing, and deeply profound sense of pride. It was not the easy, reflexive pride of a father for his heir. It was a harder, more meaningful pride. The pride of a master craftsman watching his apprentice, after a long and difficult struggle, finally begin to learn the true nature of the work. Later that night, after the speeches and the toasts, I stood up to say a final word. "I just want to thank you all for a wonderful year," I said, looking out at the faces of my employees, my family. "This company is not a building. It is not a name on a stock ticker. It is people. It is the hard work, the integrity, and the character of the people in this room. That is the foundation." As I raised my glass, my eyes met Marcus's across the crowded room. He was standing in the back by himself. He was not smiling, but he was not looking away. He simply met my gaze and gave a single slow and almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of understanding, a nod of respect, a nod that said more than any of the apologies he had ever offered. The kingdom had been dismantled, but on the old, solid foundation of hard work and earned respect, something new and perhaps something stronger was finally and hopefully being built. The party is over. The last of the guests have gone home, leaving behind the pleasant, lingering scent of pine and good food and the quiet, happy echo of genuine laughter. I stand by the large window of my new apartment, looking out at the glittering, frozen expanse of the Detroit skyline. A year ago, on this very night, I sat in my study and systematically dismantled the company I had spent my life building. It was an act of destruction, a necessary and terrible war. Tonight, there is only peace. I think about the word inheritance. For years, I believed I knew what it meant. It meant building a kingdom, a powerful, profitable, and respected enterprise, and then handing the keys to my son. I thought the greatest gift a father could give his child was a finished product, a life free from the struggle and the hardship that I had known. I thought I was giving him a throne. I realize now I was only giving him a cage. A throne that is given, not earned, is not a seat of power. It is a velvet-lined prison. It traps its occupant in a world of unearned privilege, breeding an arrogance that is a poison to the soul. My son did not value the kingdom because he did not understand the cost of building it. He did not respect the power because he had never been powerless. He saw the company not as a living, breathing legacy of integrity and hard work, but as a simple machine for generating wealth and status. And when I stood in his way, he saw me as nothing more than a faulty component to be removed. The hardest thing I ever had to do was not to build my company, but to tear it down. I had to become the very thing my son accused me of being: an obstacle, a force of destruction. I had to dismantle the kingdom to force him to look at the rubble and to finally, for the first time in his life, begin to learn how to build something for himself with his own two hands. I spent a lifetime building a company for my son, believing that the greatest inheritance was a kingdom to rule. But a throne that is given, not earned, has no value. I had to dismantle the kingdom to teach him how to build a foundation. I learned that a father's true legacy is not the seat he leaves for his son at the head of the table, but the lesson that teaches him the hard work, respect, and character required to earn that seat for himself. True power is not inherited. It is built, one connection, one project, one day at a time. What do you think? Was my lesson too harsh, or was it the only way for him to learn the true value of his inheritance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, you can support me by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for listening.